Over this week, we looked at Jacob and his wrestling with the angel, and the point being, your biggest problem is you. That's what has to be dealt with. Remember, our course for this week in this session has been a life worth living. So if you want to have a worthwhile life, you have to deal with you. Then we looked at Joseph and the coat of many colors and the unlimited potential. Then we looked at David and his courage, and we looked at yesterday at Daniel and his priorities and his principles. In all of these things, in all of these cases, we've seen this preference for the younger over the elder. And we've woven a thread through this whole week that's a principle of what God, it's a major theme of what God is trying to do in establishing his people. And today we're going to look at Joshua, the conqueror. So, again, it's such familiar stories, it's easy that we don't have to look at a whole bunch of text, because I trust that you can follow along in the narrative of Joshua's life. But Joshua, I don't know if you remember, if you noticed, but he actually goes up to Sinai with Moses when Moses receives the law. Now, it says when God communicates at the beginning of that portion of Scripture, he says Moses alone. But then when it comes time to go, Moses makes an altar, and he grabs Joshua, and away they go. I don't know what Joshua was doing all that time. I don't know where he was. I think that it's clear that it was just Moses and God, but maybe he had him stationed at a strategic point and waiting and attending, and I don't know what he was doing, but he was there. The point being that he wasn't down with all the people when they were making a golden calf. And that's the interesting point that I want to lay out here, is that Joshua, as drawing near to Moses, as learning to be the apprentice to Moses, this young man has the wisdom and the place in Moses' life that he's alongside on the right side of history. Again and again, that's the thing that we see about Joshua, is that he always ends up on the right side of history. And there's something about wisdom that does that, A man who is wise has the ability to foresee and be in the right place. There's all kinds of ways that that's useful. To think about what is this all going to look like when the moment is past? How are people going to look back on this scene? Where's my place when the moment is gone, and when people are looking back? Where was I? Joshua is always in the right place. There's something about all those other lessons from all those other young men that we've learned that's true in this young man as well. I think that a part of that principle of the wisdom of this young man is that he knows how to be serious. And I think that's, why is it that the younger is not preferred? Why is this principle out of order, that the young man is always brought up, and that it's out of order, it's different, it's the exception, not the rule? And the exception is that many people who are young are foolish. And when you marry wisdom with youth, there's something about that combination that's remarkable. And it's the ability for that young person to take his zeal and the power of youth, the strength that comes along with being young, and apply it to wisdom, and to draw near to people that you can mix the power of youth with the wisdom of the old. And so that's something that I would encourage all of you, as we look today, to be thinking about, is what does it mean to apply your strength and your ability to the best of the generations before you? How do you incorporate your strength and your ability and your opportunity and your freedom and your liberty, all those things that you possess in your youth? How do you incorporate the wisdom and the best of your people that have gone before you? How do you incorporate that into your life? Well, to some degree, it's going to mean that you're going to have to stand out from your peers because, not everybody's doing that. We usually end up with these youth group mentalities among our people where everybody wants to play, where everybody wants to have fun, but there's some remarkable young people that say, there's a time and a place for that, but I want my life to be about something else. That there's something more serious to do with myself. I'm not just looking for distraction. I'm not just looking for what's fun in the moment. That I have enough wisdom to say, I'm going to try to do something else. And that will require standing out. It will require making other choices, putting other things in priority above what's easy, fun, and expedient. So I think we see that a lot in Joshua's life. He's always drawn near to Moses. It's interesting. Yeah, we'll save that for later. Look at this passage with me in Exodus chapter 33. This was something that didn't stand out to me before. Exodus 33. This is right after the provocation. This is shortly after. There's several chapters there at the end of Exodus in the 20s that are the revelation of what Moses receives at Sinai and the institution, the ordinance, and then he comes down and deals with the rebellion and rebukes Aaron and all that stuff. So this is shortly after all that. And what it says is, it's basically the charge to go into the promised land at the beginning of 33. And then there's also a curse that's come along, like this unknown curse that God says, I'm going to come up in the middle of you when you don't expect because of your rebellion. And everybody's worried, and they take off their ornaments as a show of humility. And then in verse 7 it says this, and Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation which was without the camp. And it came to pass when Moses went out unto the tabernacle that all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door. And all the people rose up and worshipped every man in his tent door. And the Lord spoke unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he turned again into the camp. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. Like, Joshua has latched on. He's become like what are those fish that suck onto a shark? A lamprey. You know those fish? You ever see these documentaries of deep water fish, and there's these sharks, and they got these sucker fish that are stuck onto them so they can eat the extra food that comes off the shark's catch? Joshua is like a lamprey to Moses. He's just sucked on to Moses' life. He says, I know this is where God's working, and I want to be where he is. I want to be there when Moses is interacting with God. I want to see what he sees. I want to hear what he hears. I've recognized the power and the potential of Moses' ministry, and I'm going to be by his side. This pattern gets repeated in other places too. Elijah and Elisha is the same thing. When you watch that whole saga play out with Elijah and Elisha at the end of when Elijah's taken up in the chariot, and it's like this test over and over again. Elijah keeps trying to push Elisha out the door. Hey, go do your own thing. I'm going to go be with God. And he says, no, I'm not going to leave your side. Go on. No, I'm not going to leave your side. Go on. No, I'm not going to leave your side. I'm going to be there. Whatever happens, I want to see it too. And if you're wise, you'll find people in your life that are like that you can hold on to, that you can be around, that you can look for wisdom. There's all kinds of brothers and sisters in our communities that are the wise, that are the righteous, that have something to say, that have something to teach, that have something to do. Get near those people. Figure out what they're about. Figure out what's happening in their life and why they are the way that they are. Mark the wise people around you that you notice and that you see, and draw near to them. Ask them for some time. Ask them for some counsel. Learn what you can learn from the older people around you. I notice, especially like in middle-aged children, you can tell a wise child. And if you watch certain families, you'll see that some children, like about the age of 10 to 15, they start to turn their attention. And you'll start to see middle-aged children, the unique ones among them, they'll start to turn their attention to what's happening, like in church circles. And they'll start to listen to what older people are saying. And they'll incline their ear. That's the biblical terminology. They'll start to pay attention and learn wisdom from older people around them. Those children are rare. But that's a pattern that you can develop in your life, where you can start to mark wise people in your community or abroad and start to get close to them and apprehend the things that they've learned in their life. That you can draw on the failures and the successes and all the wisdom that they've gained in the years that they've been following God, and communicate that stuff. And Joshua gets all this access to so many things that he didn't have to go through. So many things. He developed such a keen sense of perceptivity. He's able to see, and that's how he's able to be on the right side of history in all of these sagas. It's how he's able to be in the right place at the right time. It's not coincidence. It's a choice that he's making to be in those places. So he's there in the tabernacle. He's committed himself to know and understand God. He's committed himself to the service of his God and the service of his people. That's what he's making his life about. It's what he's preparing a ministry from the time that Moses first puts his eyes on him. Moses first distinguishes him as a noble young man. And from that point on, he's drawing near. He's paying attention. He's learning. And there he is in the tabernacle. And then we have the 12 spies. Turn to Numbers chapter 13. Let's read this passage. What we know about this is that Joshua and Caleb are very young men. So this is the first thought I had, is like, it's interesting that Joshua and Caleb even get in the lot with the 12. You got all these Israelites, and they're going to pick 12 of them. And ideally, that'd be one from every tribe, right? Of all those tribes, Joshua and Caleb make the grade. Two very, very young men that are singled out. Now, I don't know if you've thought through what this mission was actually like. Imagine that I sent 12 of us to go to, let's say last year, I sent 12 of you to go into ISIS territory and figure out who was there and what was going on. This is enemy territory. This is behind front lines. This is like, the 12 spies are like the Navy SEALs of Israel. They're the ones that are picked to sneak across enemy lines and spy out the enemy that we're going to go fight with and figure out what the odds are that are stacked against us. And it's an overwhelming task. Like they're blown away. But somehow Joshua and Caleb, of their tribes, these two very young men, get selected for this very, very important job. So there's something about these guys from the beginning. So then let's just see what they say. It's verse 17 in Numbers 13 is where we start. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said unto them, get ye up this way southward and go into the mountain. We'll fast forward. So they went up and searched the land from the wilderness of Zin in verse 21 unto Rehob, as men cometh to Hamath. And they ascended by the south and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes. And they bore it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook Eshcol, because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron, to all the congregation of the children of Israel, unto the wilderness of Paran, to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. Verse 27, and they told him, and said, we came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey. And this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land, which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants, and we are in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. I think that this story is so fascinating, and it's such a turning point for the people of God, because it's the story of the ages. It's always this clash between the young and the old. It's always this clash between opportunity and danger. It's always this clash, and such is life, right? That's when you're 40 and you have a bunch of children, you think about the world in a different way than when you're 20 and you don't. Dangers become more dangerous. And it's one of those things, right? Like this, it's a bad idea to make caricatures of these people in the Bible. Like we do that with the Pharisees a lot. They become like this boogeyman of the biblical literature. And they cease to be the warning that they should be, because we find ourselves unable to relate to them. And whenever we read this story from our youth about the 12 spies, the 10 are such bad guys, and so they are. But we don't want them to be such bad guys that we can't understand why they made a bad report. There was a very real danger, a very real threat. And to go around, to cruise around in the Promised Land and see how very many people and how very strong they were and how walled their cities were, it's reasonable, right? It's reasonable to say, that's too much, we can't do it. What do we got? We just ran away from Egypt. We got nothing but sticks and goats. How are we going to do this? The difference is faith. That's the difference. The data is no different between the 2 and the 10. They see the same place. They can make the same analysis. There's no different data. But the data is interpreted through either the eyes of faith or the eyes of doubt. And that's the opportunity that you need to leverage in your life, is to take the data of life, to take the difficulties and the things that are in front of you and the potentials and view them through the lens of faith rather than doubt. And it's not groundless faith. The two had very good reason for what they said. They knew that God had charged them. They knew that they were sent by God. They had seen the deliverance. But it's the same thing, right? The 10 also see the deliverance. The 10 also walk through the Red Sea. All the people saw the same things. The only difference is how they're looking at it. And we have to emulate that view of faith. It's not absurdity. It's not that they're not. Joshua and Caleb are not just name it and claim it Pentecostals. They're not just saying if we believe it, it'll happen. There's a reason for why they have this view. God has been working with them. God has promised them. They have a sure footing in what they're saying. And they're saying, God has already told us this is ours. We just need to live it out. And if I could encourage you in anything, it's to look at the church in the same way. Jesus has told us what he wants his church to be. He's told us how we're supposed to act. He's told us how we're supposed to be in the land. And some of us need to get up and say, let's just do what he said. It's already promised. It's there. We just have to look through the lens of faith, and we can actually do what Jesus promised his people would do. In the next chapter, it says, all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried. Would God that we died in the land of Egypt. Horrible people. Wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return unto Egypt? I'll tell you what, that's a surprisingly common attitude. Return to Egypt. But nobody ever says it, right? I think that's what's remarkable about the Bible is it's just saying what people do. Lots of people have a return to Egypt attitude, but they would never say it. And that may be why these stories are what they are, is just because it's put in stark enough terms that you can call it what it is. But this notion that maybe it's too much work, maybe this isn't worth it, maybe I should just settle down, maybe I should just not be so worried about things, not be so uptight, not be so, hey, we're watching people fall off in droves. There's all kinds of people returning to Egypt. It's too much trouble, it's too much hypocrisy, too many, nobody knows, everybody's just making their own way. Maybe it's not worth it, maybe I'm making too much out of things. Let's just go the easy way. That's common. And they said one to another, let us make a captain and let us return to Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel, and Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spoke unto all the company of the children of Israel. These guys are pleading. Come on, guys, come on. We can do this. They're trying to remind their people of their heritage, of their birthright. Esau makes a lot more sense when you see it this way, right? Like, how easy are they willing? They have some small impediment, and they're willing to give up their birthright. I'd rather have it easy. I'd rather have food today than the promise of tomorrow. They rent their clothes, and they spoke unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it, it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land. Rebellion and fear, those are the two main problems, rebellion and fear. For they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle. It upsets people when you push back against the return to Egypt. It makes people uncomfortable when you point out compromise, when you try to lead people into faith, when you try to put forward the hope that God's trying to raise up. But here again we see this, of all of them, it's just Joshua and Caleb. Just the two, just the young. Towards the end of that time in the wilderness, Moses finally ordains Joshua to take his place. It's finally time for the young man to lead. He's seen enough and he's done enough and he's been close enough and he's been through enough situations and he's developed enough of his own skills and abilities. He's been through enough battles that it's time for him to lead in his own right. And the hope is always that he'll incorporate those things, that he won't repeat the errors that he's learned from. But that's always a big question, yeah? How do you move forward? How do you grow and develop a new, how do you incorporate new experiences into your life and not repeat the errors? How do you retain that perspective that allows youth to be strong, that allows that courage of David to go on? In a lot of these stories, it doesn't work that way. Even David, I almost considered contrasting David's older mistakes with his first fervor and power and right decisions. It happens a lot. This is oftentimes the place where the story changes, and the young man who is so dynamic and so powerful and so mighty starts to make all kinds of misjudgments and errors and sin. Solomon does it. David did it. Even Gideon. It doesn't always end well. What starts well. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a way to move forward in faith, to grow and experience in a way that you continue to incorporate new lessons and become broader and more expansive instead of turning a corner and starting to go downhill. But it means really possessing and owning the mistakes and the wisdom. It means an honesty. Here's one of the most rare things that I know of is the ability to understand yourself. It's why I started with Jacob. Because there are so many things in our heads that are disposed to lead us astray. There are so many ways of patterns that we think for very good reasons, for existing in the world, for reducing complexity, for all kinds of reasons that we make errors in judgment. We make assumptions about ourselves and our motives, and about others and their motives that cloud things that are not right. And we have to have some kind of way to work through how to really get a good view of ourselves. And we see it crying. We see different authors in the Bible crying out for some sense of perspective, some sense of external input. What do I add to my own thinking in order to not repeat the errors of people who have gone in front of me? There's several things that you can do in that regard. I mean, obviously, I suppose it goes without saying, but being honest with God and having a devout prayer life where God can actually speak to you and rebuke you and change your mind about things is one important thing. Also, incorporating people in your life. This is one of the reasons that we advocate community so strongly here is that our intention in community, and I mean that with a capital C, like community on purpose, not just accidentally the people that you live in. You know, like a homeowners association is a community. Those people aren't involved in each other, they just happen to live in the same place. I'm talking about community with a capital C, where you're purposefully integrating other people's lives into yours. And there's some very specific reasons why we emphasize the necessity of community. And it's for this exact reason, that I need someone else who knows me well and that I trust to evaluate my potential error. So the notion is this. We've been given a task to do as God's people. We're debtors to the gospel. We owe it to the world to try to make converts out of the gospel, to try to bring people into the kingdom of God. That's our job. And that job is way, way too big for any one of us to do. So we gather ourselves together. And in the interest of serving the gospel, in the interest of making disciples, we need people to input the things that I can't see for myself. Those accountability groups that you guys talked about right before prayer meeting, that's exactly that. I need someone else's perspective. My vision is too limited to be properly effective. I can only see this much. And this much of this story, even about me, is far too narrow. I need someone else looking from here and from here to be able to see the things that I don't, especially about me. So I try to bring people into my life close enough that they can see what I don't put out there myself. This is a huge, huge problem among us because we set up our lives, so we go to work, we have our family, we do this stuff, and then church is this thing that we do a couple times a week. And maybe we do it 4 or 5 times a week, but it's just this place where we meet together for a meeting and somebody's going to be speaking like this, and all of us do our social thing. All of us are, hi, how are you? I'm great. Well, something didn't work this well, but other than that, things are well, and the family's good, but, Susie's sick, and Billy scraped his knee, and that we do all that kind of stuff, and that's good. It's important. It's more than a lot of people have. Praise God for it. But that's not the stuff that's real. Because all that you see there is what I'm putting out there. But if you live in my house, downstairs, or next door, well, then you might see other things. You might see when things aren't working well. You might see when I'm in crisis. You might see when I'm frustrated. You might see when I'm upset. You might see when I'm celebrating. You might see all kinds of things. And that kind of access is actually valuable. When you can see more than my public face, when you can see my private life, that's where I might gain some insight. That's where you might be able to help me. That's where you might be able to say, hey, the other day when that thing happened, I noticed this, and that seems like a problem. Have you thought about that before? That's how you move through these phases of life, and you don't have to stumble. That you can keep moving forward in influence, in ministry, in responsibility, without falling. So Joshua takes the place of Moses here. And Moses goes and dies. I like that painting. This has always been really strange to me. Moses is the most dynamic man in the Bible. In a certain kind of sense, spiritually, he's the pinnacle. He's as much as can be produced. It says, let's actually look at what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 34. The last chapter of Deuteronomy. Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo to the top of Pisgah, that's over against Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead, unto Dan, and all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, unto the utmost sea in the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, and the city of palm trees, unto Zoar. And the Lord said unto him, This is the land which I swore unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thy eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor, but no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. The days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and in all that mighty hand, and in all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel. That's about as glowing an epitaph as you could expect. He's probably the greatest man outside of Christ that ever lived. He saw God. He caused God to repent. That's no small task. He offered to substitute himself in the place of God's wrath to protect the people. He leads them through the wilderness, all those trials, all those stiff-necked people, all the problems. He bore it all. He's the bringer of the law. And it all stops short of the promised land. And that's really interesting, because the more responsibility you have, this last slide was the ordination of Joshua. The more your influence and responsibility grows, the more your actions matter. As your life grows and abounds, and you become, you work in more and more ministry, you're responsible for more and more things. Maybe some of you get families and you start to have your own children. The more that your responsibility and influence grows, the more your mistakes matter. They become exponentially large, just like the good things in your life. And it seems like a small thing to me that causes the breach of Moses. Like it's all very understandable, right? I'm so tired of these people, again with the complaints, again with the crying out, again with the rebellion, again with the disobedience. And it's that little moment of frustration, and Moses strikes the rock, and God says, that's it. One infraction, you're done. I was thinking about that this week, how the more our influence grows, the more our mistakes matter. And that one breach, that one violation, God says, Moses, I expected more of you. And the striking of the rock. And you wonder if Moses understood all the significance. He surely did, right? He's the prophet. He saw God face to face. Did he know that rock was Christ? Did he know that they were baptized in the Red Sea? Does he know the significance of all those things when he does them? I don't know if he does or not, but I know that he knew better. He knew the importance of relying specifically on what God said. He's the lawgiver, right? He's the one that brought the law. He said, do it exactly how it's told you. And he was given specific instructions himself, and he fails. And as important as it was for Joshua to be there when the pillar of God was over the tabernacle and in the middle of the sanctuary with Moses and up on Sinai, it was also just as important for him to be there when Moses struck the rock. And to see why the failure happened and to learn from that mistake as well. To have been through all those situations right there in the middle of it and to see that failure of his leader, that failure of the one that had taken him under his wing, the guy that was apprenticing him and showing him, that failure was important for Joshua to watch as well and learn from. It was all part of the preparation for him to become the leader, the conqueror, to bring the children into Israel. The last lesson before the entrance of the promised land is this. Don't trifle with God's words. What he says he means. And it's also obviously incredibly typologically significant that the bringer of the law stops and Joshua goes across the river. And when he goes across, the typology gets very, very thick through this part of the Old Testament. Joshua meets the angel of the Lord outside of Jericho. And that's fascinating to me. Some people think that was a Christophany, that it was a pre-incarnate experience of Christ. It says it's the angel of the Lord, the captain of his hosts. You can make of it what you will. I'm inclined to that idea myself, especially because of the typological significance of Joshua. Like, that's Jesus' name. In the Septuagint, this is Iesu, the son of none. Jesus, the son of none. And so the mirror, like this is a mirror. The angel of the Lord meets the leader of God's people. And it's interesting, the boldness of Joshua in this situation. You know, he's responsible for all the army of the hosts of Israel at this point. And when he sees this angel, he grabs his sword and he's ready to fight. Nothing deters Joshua. That same boldness that we talked about that David has, Joshua has too. He's ready to take on whatever. He's confident in who he is. He's confident in who the people are. He's confident in their mission. He's the same Joshua still that was part of the 12 spies. And when he sees this angel, it doesn't matter if it's an angel or anybody, I know what I'm supposed to do, and he's ready to fight. That's a powerful testimony. It's a powerful witness. This is in Joshua chapter 5. It's interesting to see what he says here. He says, and And the children of Israel encamped in verse 10 in Gilgal and kept the Passover. So it's right at the Passover. And then in verse 13, and it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, Art thou for us or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Now, why is that significant? Well, we talked about a lot of the significance, but the main point is this. Here's the repetition of the same pattern of the young man taking part in the old promise. Where did Moses meet God? At a burning bush. And what did God say to Moses? Take your shoes from off your feet, for thou standest on holy ground. And now here, Joshua enters into his ministry in the promised land, and the first thing that happens is his repetition of what his forebearer had done. His own participation. It's his version of the same thing. He meets God, and he recognizes the holiness of that moment. Over and over again, this is a pattern. So then he goes from here, and then he starts to the conquest of Jericho. And what's interesting to me is that Joshua's campaign in the Promised Land is kind of like it's a new epoch. It's a new era. The very first significant battle in the Promised Land is Jericho. And this is war like we've never known before. This isn't the same old, let's duke it out. Sword to sword, arrow to arrow, bash down the walls, fight them, beat them. This is something entirely new. Nobody's ever seen anything like this happen before. God comes with a new directive and a new command. And he says, instead of setting up your bulwarks and bashing down the wall and battering in the gates and fighting hand to hand and man to man, I just want you to walk around the city for 7 days. And in the seventh day, you're going to blow the trumpets. And the walls come down. And what? It's crazy. But there it is. Down they come. God saying, with no uncertainty, this isn't about you. I'm doing this. This is my battles. These are my conquests. This is my land. And he promised over and over again that I'll send an angel before you. He says it to Moses several times about the conquest of the promised land. And I will send an angel before you. And I will send an angel before you. And I will send an angel before you. And then Joshua meets an angel right outside of Jericho. And then they don't even touch the city. And God does the work. But there's still this part for them to fulfill, right? They have to go through the pattern. They have to do what he tells them to do. They have to follow literally exactly what God says for them to do. And then he brings the victory. There's another example of the day that the sun stood still. Talk about boldness. Joshua says in a prayer, sun stand still and moon too. Never saw that coming. But there it is. Look at what it says there. That's in chapter 10. In verse 12, Then spoke Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon. And thou, moon, in the valley of, I don't know how to say that, Aijalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stayed. until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. So typologically, we're supposed to be learning that everything's changing on this side of the promised land. Now the warfare is at a different scale and a different scope. Something different is happening here. This isn't just now that Moses has been left behind, now that Moses is on the other side, we've entered into the promised land. All this is really significant stuff for what's going to happen in the new covenant. And in the new promised land, have you guys put all that together? Obviously you have. It's some of the most basic typology of the Old Testament. We have a practice here where we actually, at our baptisms, it's something that comes from North Africa in the early centuries of the church. And Tertullian's the one that mentions it. They used to give milk and honey at their baptisms. And we do that here too, not because the Bible tells us to or anything, just because it's a super cool type, right? Like the message is clear. This is the promised land. Not when you die and go to heaven. Right here, right now, at the waters of baptism, when you've been made a new person, this is the promised land. This is the place where you've been trying to get to. This is where God wanted to bring you. This is the promised land. If you've been through the waters of baptism, you're in the promised land. This is where you're supposed to be living out all of God's dreams for what his people are supposed to be. This is the promised land. And there's battles to fight, but the land is ours. This is the place that was provided for us. This is it. Not some future epoch. Not some day after you die. Right here, right now, you are supposed to be in the promised land. You're supposed to be provided with what God provided for his people. You're supposed to be living in the abundance of this life. You're supposed to be reaping things that you didn't plant and harvesting from vineyards that you didn't sow. The land is supposed to be providing for your needs. You're supposed to be in abundance. Out of your belly shall flow rivers of living water. This is the land. And the battles are different over here. We don't fight them by hand. It's a different kind of conquest. It's a different kind of occupation. Over here, God fights for his people. Over here, God makes a way. Over here, the walls fall down. It's a new construct. It's a new kind of war. But there's also giants. There's also walled cities. There's also places that need to be... And those things aren't accidental. Can I make that abundantly clear to you? The giants are supposed to be fought by Israel in the Promised Land. God could have changed all this typology. He could have sent a tornado or a fire or a famine or anything and driven out the lands of the Promised Land. He doesn't do that. He wants Joshua and the armies of Israel to go from place to place and fight and conquer and possess. You go to the next place in life and you fight your battles and you possess that land. And then you keep going. And there's all kinds of typology for you to learn from the conquest of Canaan. Some of the tribes, they say they don't want to go fight anymore. We're happy with what we have here. Can we just stay here? This is enough for us. Who was it? Dan and half tribe of Manasseh? Is that who it was? You can fact check me later. But no, they can't stop. You can leave your women and children there, but you got to keep fighting. You got to keep moving. So the battle's different here. we've talked about it clearly already, the correlation between Joshua and Jesus, Yeshua. And I think that when I was trying to think about how to wrap up this week, I almost did this whole session on Jesus himself. But it seemed more fitting to use Joshua. Because Joshua is the leader, right? He's the one, he's the young man, he's the new one on the stage that's going to carry everybody through. And he's the one that people are supposed to look at. He's in the place of Moses, and he's taken over, and he's got a different ministry and a better ministry because now we're on the other side of the Jordan. Now we're in the promised land. And he's the leader that everyone's supposed to look at. He's in Moses' place, but he's leading us where Moses couldn't get us to. And now, for us, this is our Joshua. This is our captain. This is our deliverer, our hero, our leader, the one we're following. And there's all these correlations when you look back at Joshua's life. You know, the call to faith. You hear Joshua pleading with the nation of Israel saying, why can't you guys believe? Why can't you just see that this has been provided for? There's a place for us to go. There's a land for us to conquer. We've already been promised this. We just have to be faithful. We just have to walk on. We just have to go. It's already been provided for. And when you look at Jesus' ministry, time and time again, the thing that he's doing is always saying, why can't you believe? Why can't you trust? You faithless and perverse generation. What is wrong with you people? Again and again, Jesus is saying, why can't you believe? Why can't you have faith? What do you need more than what I've shown you to see? And time again, the remarkable examples in Jesus' ministry are people who of their own self just say, like the woman with the issue of blood. Who tells her? Who tells her if she touches Jesus' garment that she can be healed? Nobody. Nobody. She takes it upon herself and she says, I don't know anything else, but I know if I get to him, that has to be my only hope. And the fact that she does that, and whoever else does that, whether it's Jairus with the sickness in his house and the death that's come to him, the faith that's expressed by even those outsiders are the thing that Jesus lifts up time and time again. The thing that he's surprised by. Because nobody else is doing it. Nobody else has this attitude that he's the one to follow. He's the one that has the answers. And wherever he sees that, wherever he sees someone saying, I don't know much, but I know if I just get to you, it's going to work. That's lifted up time and time again in Jesus' ministry, just like Joshua. Just come on, just follow, just keep up. So Joshua is a type of our Jesus. We talked the other day about this is a really neat painting. I'd never seen it before. This is somebody's take on the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And the reason I put this slide here is because he said that he spoke of them all the things which were written of him in Moses. That these disciples on the road to Emmaus, they got however long that walk is, they got a lecture series from Jesus on typology in the Old Testament. That he was pointing out, here's the space. This was about me. This was about me. This is about me. This is about me. And that's good Christian theology. You can't get a better endorsement than trying to look at the scriptures the way that Jesus taught his disciples to. Go back and look and see the places and see the times that what was happening was really about him. Was really teaching us to follow his lesson, his plan, his leading through the promised land. And when we talked the other day, we talked about the things that were uniquely Christian, the things that separate us, those implements from the temple that were spoiled. And I think that my last slide is the thing that is most unique about us is cross. I wanted to end here because all of the things that we've talked about this week, they have a center. And the center of all the virtue that we've talked about, all the lessons that I've tried to point out, everything that we've talked about, if you want to find them, this is the path that you have to go. This is what makes us unique among all people, is the cross. And I don't think that we talk about it enough. I don't think that we understand it enough. I don't think that we lift it up enough. And what I mean by that is that it should be the center of the way that we think about who and what we are. When I think about the cross, I think about conflict. Like it's bloody, right? It's horrible. It's an implement of torture. It's bad stuff. But in a weird way, it's the worst and the best. In a weird way, it's where everything comes. It's the center of the earth. If I could sum up the cross in one sentence, the cross is the center of existence. And what I mean by that is it's where everything converges. Like graphically, that's what it means. You have X marks the spot. It's the center. It's where God has been working through all of human history to get us to one focal point. The cross is like a crosshair. It's like the center of a scope. It's like where everything is supposed to be focused and directed. It's where we should look for everything. It's the convergence of all things. It's where man runs into God. It's where holiness runs into sin. It's where death runs into life. It's the center of all conflict, is right there at that one moment. But it's not just that moment, because Jesus says that we have to take up our cross daily and follow him. It's not just the center in history. It's the center in the life of his people. It has everything to do with everything we are. And the virtues that we've talked about, the ability to deal with self, the principles and the priorities and the bravery and the potential, all zero in at cross. And every day and everywhere we go and everything we do, we have this conflict, this juxtaposition, this convergence of two ways. Which way will you go? This is the essential ministry of Jesus, to back people into a corner and say, there's two ways that emerge from here. Which way are you going to go? You can go your way or you can go my way. And every day, that's what we're doing. Every day we wake up and we say, are we going to go my way or his way? And what we have been talking about this week is all the decisions and all the choices and all the virtue and all the caliber of character and integrity that constitute God's way, and the potential that you can be if you bear the cross. If you repeatedly make the decision to say no to self. Not my way. Not my way. It's the key to unlocking all these things. It's what we should be looking for. Whether it's small decisions or large decisions, whether it's who to marry or where to go, or what to do or who to be. You need to find in your life how to delineate the lines of the cross. As you move forward in your life, as you make the decisions that you make, trying to trace out the elements of the cross in the decisions that you make. What does it mean to follow Jesus at the cross? And I don't want that to be as ethereal as it sounds. I don't want it to be as philosophical as it's coming across. I mean, you have choices to make, and I have choices to make day by day, and some of those are going to constitute choices for myself and for ease and for comfort, and some of them are going to be for others and for suffering and for the good of not me. And the extent to which you can make that decision not for yourself is the extent to which you can walk in the things that we've been talking about this week. So how do you pick up a cross? What does that mean in your life tomorrow? What does it mean? I'm worried that as I say all this, you're thinking about something much bigger than what I mean. I mean very, very small things. I mean like the way that you serve your family. I mean like the way that you are the one that comes around and meets needs. I mean the way that you are the one who notices the person that's hurting. I mean the way that you're in a crowd and you gravitate towards the weakest and the hurting and the smallest, and that you get involved there. I mean that you're, of the people that you are involved with, you're the one that's always the first to come under. That you're the last to seek for attention. That you're the last that needs ministered to. That you're always elevating the people around you and encouraging righteousness. And those are the things that I mean. The sum of those kinds of decisions made over and over again make unparalleled lives. And at the end of the day, the life that is worth living is the life that's lived for others and not for self. And I think I'm going to end with that sentence. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we've spent these hours this week looking into the lives of people who you honored You've preserved their testimony and their life for all these many generations for our benefit. And we would be remiss if we did not see behind every one of these examples the life of Christ and the example of Him. I pray, Father, that you would help us to study Him well, to know the lines of His character and teaching and example, to see Him traced across the whole blueprint of the Scriptures, and to sum all of that up at His cross. I pray, Father, that we would learn how to be a cross-bearing people. Not just in some undetermined future, in some bloody death, but in the slow, small choices day by day. That we would learn how not to elevate some future cross-bearing, but the daily kind. The kind where we refuse to yield to self, where we refuse to be caught up in ourselves, where we refuse to put ourselves forward and first and foremost. I pray, Father, that you would raise up these young people to be the sacrificers of self, the bearers of crosses, in a million unrecognized ways, that you might make of them a mighty people. In Jesus' name, amen.